7 days. That is all it takes to begin changing the entire architecture of how your mind works. Not 7 years. Not 7 months. 7 days of deliberate, disciplined, stoic practice. And the person looking back at you in the mirror at the end of this week will think differently, feel differently, and move through the world with a power and a clarity that most people never experience in their entire lives. Most people wake up every single morning and do the same things, think the same thoughts, react the same way to the same problems, and wonder why nothing in their life ever changes. They read the self-help books. They watch the motivation videos. They say the affirmations. And then they walk right back into the same patterns, the same habits, the same mental loops, because they never actually changed anything at the level where change actually happens. Inside the brain. What you are about to receive in this video is not a motivational speech. It is a 7-day operating system for the human mind, built on the ancient wisdom of the Stoics and confirmed by everything modern neuroscience now understands about how the brain actually rewires itself. Every single day has a specific practice, a specific principle, and a specific shift that compounds on the one before it. By day 7, you will not just feel different. You will be different, because the brain you have is not fixed. It is not finished. It is not locked into the patterns it currently runs. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's extraordinary, lifelong ability to form new connections, break old ones, and literally restructure itself in response to new thought and new behavior. The Stoics called it the discipline of the mind. 2,000 years apart, they were describing the same thing. So before we go any further, if you are watching this and you are not yet part of this community, subscribe right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Every week on this channel we go this deep. Every week we bring you ancient wisdom that is shockingly, powerfully relevant to the life you are living today. Subscribe now, and let us begin day 1. Day 1. The discipline of attention. The first thing the Stoics understood, and the first thing neuroscience confirms, is that you do not change your brain by changing your circumstances. You change your brain by changing what you give your attention to. Because wherever your attention goes, your neural energy flows. And wherever your neural energy flows consistently, the brain builds structure. Marcus Aurelius wrote at the very beginning of his meditations, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." That second part, look things in the face and know them for what they are, is the entire practice of day 1. It is the practice of deliberate, disciplined attention. Here is what is actually happening in your brain right now, before any of this work begins. Your brain has a system called the default mode network, a set of interconnected regions that activate when you are not focused on any particular task, when you are daydreaming, when you are ruminating, when your mind is wandering. And for most people, the default mode network is running almost constantly, cycling through the same worries, the same regrets, the same fears, the same replays of old conversations and old wounds. This is not a character flaw. It is just an untrained mind doing what untrained minds do. The Stoics called this the undisciplined faculty, and they were absolutely clear about the consequences. An undisciplined attention is the source of all suffering, all poor decision-making, and all wasted human potential. Not external circumstances, not other people. The undisciplined, wandering, reactive attention. Day 1 practice is simple and it is demanding. From the moment you wake up, you practice returning your attention to what is actually in front of you. Not what happened yesterday. Not what might happen tomorrow. What is here? What is real? What is now? Every time your mind wanders, and it will wander constantly, at first, you simply notice that it has wandered, and you bring it back. Without judgment, without frustration, with the calm, patient discipline of a person who understands that every return is a repetition, and every repetition is a rep in the gym of the mind. Neuroscientists at Harvard University conducted a study tracking the happiness levels of people during different activities and mental states. Their finding was remarkable and important. It is not what people are doing that determines their happiness. It is whether their mind is present while they are doing it. People were significantly happier when their mind was fully engaged with what they were doing, even a routine, unpleasant task, than when their mind was wandering, even to pleasant thoughts. This is day 1. The practice of presence. The discipline of attention. You are not trying to empty your mind. You are not trying to achieve some mystical state. You are simply practicing the most powerful cognitive skill a human being can develop, the ability to choose what you think about. Because the person who controls their attention controls their reality. And today, starting right now, you are beginning to take that control back. Tonight, before you sleep, sit for 5 minutes and write down one honest answer to this question. Where did my attention go today that did not serve me? Not as a criticism, as data. You are mapping the terrain of your own mind. And that map is the foundation of everything that comes next. Day 2. The death of the victim story. There is a story you tell yourself about your life. About why things are the way they are. About why you have not yet become who you know you are capable of becoming. About who is responsible for the difficulties you have faced, the opportunities you have missed, the pain you carry. And on day 2, we are going to examine that story with complete honesty, because it may be the single biggest obstacle standing between you and the brain you are trying to build. Epictetus, born a slave, who had every reason to spend his entire life in a victim narrative, said something that changed the course of Western philosophy. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." What happened to you is real. The pain is real. The injustice may be completely real. But the story you have built around what happened, the meaning you have assigned to it, the identity you have constructed from it, that is yours. And it can be changed. The victim story is seductive. It is one of the most comfortable and dangerous places the human mind can live. Comfortable because it provides an explanation for every difficulty that places the cause outside of yourself, which means you are never responsible, which means you never have to do the hard work of change. Dangerous because as long as you live inside it, you are permanently powerless. You have handed the controls of your life to whoever or whatever you have cast as the villain of your story. Here is what is happening in the brain when you run a victim narrative. Every time you replay a story in which you are acted upon, in which the cause of your situation is outside of you, you are strengthening a neural pathway that connects your sense of self to helplessness. You are literally training your brain, repetition by repetition, to understand itself as powerless. And a brain that understands itself as powerless will make decisions, choose relationships, and interpret opportunities through that lens, creating a self-fulfilling confirmation of the very story you are telling. The Stoics had a practice they called the reinterpretation of impressions. When something happened, an insult, a setback, a loss, an injustice, they would deliberately stop before forming a judgment about it and ask, is this actually as bad as it first appears? What else could this mean? What is within my control in this situation? Not to minimize what happened, not to pretend pain does not exist, but to refuse to be defined by what happened, to insist on being the author of the meaning they assign to their experience. Day 2 practice is this. Identify the single biggest story in your life that casts you as a victim of someone or something outside your control. Write it down. All of it. The full, unfiltered version. And then, underneath it, write a different version. Not a false version. Not a version that pretends nothing bad happened. A version in which you are not the victim, but the protagonist. A version in which the difficult thing that happened is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a transformation. A version in which you are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you chose to do next. This rewriting is not a writing exercise. It is a neurological intervention. You are creating a new pathway alongside the old one. You are not erasing the past. You are refusing to let it write your future. And in doing so, you are taking the first step toward one of the most important things the Stoics ever described, what Marcus Aurelius called the power to choose your own response. That power is yours. It has always been yours. Day 2 is the day you claim it. Day 3, the practice of voluntary discomfort. Day 3 is the day the work becomes physical. And this is where most people quietly exit, because what the Stoics prescribe for day 3 is something that the modern world has spent enormous energy trying to eliminate. Discomfort. Deliberate, voluntary, chosen discomfort. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared?" He was not talking about masochism. He was not advocating for suffering for its own sake. He was identifying something profoundly important about the relationship between the comfortable life and the weak mind. Here is the neurological reality of comfort. When your brain is given everything it wants, exactly when it wants it, with no friction or delay, it begins to downregulate its dopamine receptors. This is the brain's adaptation mechanism. It reduces sensitivity to pleasure in proportion to how easily pleasure is obtained. The result is a brain that requires more and more stimulation to feel the same level of reward, that finds less and less satisfaction in ordinary experience, and that becomes progressively less capable of enduring any form of difficulty. This is why people who have the most comfortable lives are so often the most miserable, and why the people who have overcome the most difficulty are so often the most resilient, the most grateful, and the most alive. The Stoics built voluntary discomfort into their daily practice precisely because they understood this dynamic. They would fast, not for religious reasons, but to prove to themselves that hunger did not own them. They would sleep on hard surfaces to remind themselves that the soft bed was a preference, not a requirement. They would walk barefoot in cold weather. They would wear simple clothing, not to suffer, but to practice the most essential Stoic truth: I am greater than my comfort. My mind is master of my body. My choices are more powerful than my cravings. And here is what happens in the brain when you practice this. Every time you choose discomfort over comfort, every time you feel the pull of the easy thing and deliberately choose the hard thing, you strengthen the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive control center of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for impulse control, long-term thinking, emotional regulation, and rational decision-making. It is, in the most literal sense, the seat of self-discipline. And like every other structure in the brain, it grows stronger through use and weaker through disuse. Day 3 practice. Choose one voluntary discomfort today and one every day for the rest of this 7-day journey. It does not need to be dramatic. A cold shower, a fast until noon, a workout that you do not feel like doing, sitting in silence for 20 minutes when every part of you wants to reach for your phone. The specific discomfort matters less than the choosing. Because what you are training is not your tolerance for cold water or hunger. You are training your brain's fundamental capacity to choose, to override the immediate signal of the body with the longer-range intention of the mind. And that capacity, that gap between stimulus and response, is the space in which all human freedom lives. Epictetus called it the most important skill a human being can develop. Modern neuroscience calls it executive function. They are both pointing at the same thing: the ability of your mind to be the master of your experience, rather than its servant. Day 3 is when you begin to build that mastery, one deliberate, chosen discomfort at a time. Day 4. Rewriting your inner voice. By day 4, you have been practicing for 3 days. Your attention is sharpening. Your victim story has been examined and rewritten. Your relationship with discomfort has begun to shift. And now we go to the place where most personal development completely fails to reach: the voice inside your head. Not the voice you perform for others. Not the voice you use in conversations. The private, constant, relentless commentary that runs in the background of every experience you have. The voice that says, you are not good enough, before you have even tried. The voice that says, this will not work, before you have even begun. The voice that narrates your failures in exhaustive detail and dismisses your successes as luck. That voice. The Stoics called this voice the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. Marcus Aurelius returned to it again and again in his meditations. Your life is what your thoughts make it. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was making a precise, practical, operational claim. The quality of your inner speech determines the quality of your inner life, which determines the quality of every decision, every relationship, and every action you take in the world. Modern neuroscience has given us the language to understand exactly why this is true. The brain has a structure called the reticular activating system, a network of neurons that acts as a filter for the enormous flood of information the senses take in every moment. The reticular activating system decides what gets through to conscious awareness and what gets filtered out. And critically, it is largely governed by what you tell it to look for. It finds what you believe to be true. It confirms what you have told yourself to expect. This is why two people can walk through the exact same day and have completely different experiences of it, because their reticular activating systems are filtering for different things based on the stories they carry inside. The practical implication of this is extraordinary and humbling. If your inner voice is constantly telling you that the world is hostile, People cannot be trusted, and you are not capable of what you dream of. Your reticular activating system will filter reality to confirm exactly that. It will notice the evidence of hostility and filter out the evidence of kindness. It will find proof of your inadequacy and overlook your capability. Not because the world is actually as you believe it to be, but because the brain is designed to find what it is looking for. Day 4 practice requires more honesty than most people are comfortable with. Spend 1 full hour today doing nothing but listening to your inner voice. Not responding to it, not arguing with it, just observing it as if you were a scientist studying a naturally occurring phenomenon. What does it say most frequently? What are its favorite accusations? Its favorite fears? Its favorite reasons why things cannot work? Write them down, all of them. And then, beside each one, write the Stoic response. Not a forced positive affirmation, not empty encouragement. The Stoic response, which is always a question. Is this actually true? What is the evidence for and against this? What would I think if someone I loved said this about themselves? Is this thought helping me build the life I want? Or is it helping me avoid the risk of trying? The Stoics did not seek to fill their minds with false positivity. They sought to fill their minds with accurate thinking. And accurate thinking, thinking that is honest about both difficulty and possibility, about both weakness and strength, is the most powerful antidote to the toxic inner voice that most people carry without ever examining it. Change the voice. Change the filter. Change what the brain finds in the world around you. That is day 4. Day 5. The Stoic practice of memento mori, using death to live fully. Day 5 brings you to one of the most powerful and most misunderstood practices in all of Stoic philosophy. It is a practice that the modern world has done everything it can to avoid, and in avoiding it, has created a culture of people who are perpetually distracted, chronically dissatisfied, and quietly terrified of the very thing they spend their entire lives refusing to think about. Death. The Stoics had a phrase for this practice, memento mori. Remember you will die. And before you close this video or dismiss this as morbid, stay with me. Because what the Stoics discovered about the contemplation of death is something that modern psychology has since confirmed through decades of research. The people who think about death the most clearly are not the most depressed. They are the most alive. Marcus Aurelius wrote about death constantly, not with despair, with extraordinary clarity. Think of yourself as dead, he wrote. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. He was not being dramatic. He was prescribing one of the most cognitively powerful practices in the Stoic repertoire, the practice of using the reality of your finitude to cut through every trivial distraction, every petty grievance, every postponed decision, and every unlived dream. Here is why this works at the neurological level. Human beings are uniquely capable of what psychologists call temporal self-projection, the ability to mentally travel forward and backward in time. This is an extraordinary cognitive gift, but it is also the source of enormous suffering, because we use it constantly to travel into the past, where we ruminate, or the future, where we worry, and almost never to travel to the very end, where the full picture of a life becomes visible with a clarity that the middle of life almost never offers. Terror management theory, a well-researched framework in social psychology, has shown that the unconscious awareness of death drives an enormous amount of human behavior. When death anxiety is unexamined and unconscious, it makes people desperate for distraction, hungry for status symbols that feel permanent, and prone to tribal thinking that offers a kind of symbolic immortality. But when death is faced consciously and honestly, when a person sits with the reality of their finitude and allows it to fully land, something completely different happens. The petty things fall away. The important things become luminously clear, and a kind of freedom emerges that is only available to the person who has genuinely reckoned with the fact that their time here is limited. Day 5 practice is this. Sit quietly today, without your phone, without any distraction, and ask yourself one question. If I knew with certainty that this was my last year of life, what would I immediately stop doing? And what would I immediately start? Write your answers. Do not perform them for anyone. Do not censor them. Write the raw, honest truth of what surfaces when you imagine your time running out. And then ask the deeper question. What is stopping me from beginning that second list today? Not the fantasies. Not, I would quit my job and travel the world if I only had a year. The real list. The The relationships I would invest in more fully. The creative work I keep saying I will start. The difficult conversation I have been avoiding. The version of myself I keep planning to become when conditions are better. Conditions will never be better. This moment is the moment. The Stoics knew this. Every great tradition of human wisdom has known this. And on day 5, you know it too. Not as a concept, as a lived, felt, embodied recognition that changes everything about how you spend the hours you have left. Day 6. Building the fortress of routine. You are now 6 days into rewiring your brain. Your attention has been trained. Your victim story has been rewritten. You have practiced voluntary discomfort. You have examined and begun to transform your inner voice. You have faced the reality of your finitude and allowed it to clarify your priorities. And now, on day 6, we build the structure that makes all of it permanent. Because here is the truth that most people discover too late. Transformation without structure does not last. Insight without habit is just inspiration, and inspiration, as powerful as it feels in the moment, has a half-life measured in hours. The people who truly change, who actually rewire their brains over the long term and hold those changes through every season of life, are the people who embed their practices into routines so deeply that the routine becomes automatic. So deeply that they do not need motivation, because the behavior no longer requires a decision. The Stoics understood this with extraordinary precision. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." The vision comes first, but then the daily practice, the unglamorous, unspectacular, repeated daily practice, is what makes the vision real. Marcus Aurelius structured his days with deliberate precision. Morning reflection, philosophical reading, journaling, evening review. Not because he needed a schedule to function, but because he understood that the architecture of the day determines the architecture of the mind. Neuroscience gives us the mechanism for why this works. In the basal ganglia, one of the oldest and most powerful structures in the brain, habits are encoded as automatic sequences. Once a behavior is repeated often enough, consistently enough, and in a consistent context, the brain stops treating it as a decision and starts treating it as a script. The cognitive cost drops to nearly zero. And this is not a limitation, it is a superpower. Because once your practices are encoded at this level, they run even when you are tired, even when you are stressed, even when motivation is nowhere to be found. The key to building this kind of routine is what researchers call habit anchoring, the practice of attaching new behaviors to existing ones. You already have anchors in your day. The moment you wake up, the act of making coffee, the transition from work to home. Each of these is a powerful anchor point for a new practice. And the Stoics built their entire daily structure around exactly these natural transition points. Here is the Stoic daily structure for the remaining days of your 7-day journey and beyond. In the morning, before anything else, 5 minutes of intention. Ask yourself what kind of person you want to be today. What are the challenges you are likely to face, and how do you intend to meet them? Marcus Aurelius began every day this way, anticipating difficulty not with dread, but with preparation. In the middle of the day, one pause. One deliberate moment of stepping back from the activity of the day to ask, am I being the person I said I would be this morning? And in the evening, the Stoic review. 3 questions, answered honestly in writing. What did I do well today? What could I have done better? What will I do differently tomorrow? This evening review was a practice shared by both the Stoics and the Pythagoreans before them. It is, in modern terms, a metacognitive practice, thinking about your own thinking, observing your own behavior from a slight distance, and using that observation to calibrate the next day. Research on metacognition consistently shows that people who practice it regularly make faster progress in almost every area of skill development than those who do not. Because the review creates a feedback loop, and feedback loops are the engine of growth. Day 6 is about designing your days with the same care and intentionality that a Stoic philosopher brought to his. Not perfectly, not rigidly, with the understanding that the structure serves you, and you are always the one in charge of the structure. Build the morning, build the evening, and in doing so, build the brain. Day 7. The integration, becoming the person who does not go back. You have arrived at day 7. And I want to begin this final day with something the Stoics would have said to any student who had completed a week of serious practice. The real work begins now. Not because the 7 days were not real. They were. Not because what you have experienced this week is not significant. It is. But because the Stoics understood something about transformation that most of the modern personal development world gets exactly backwards. The goal is not to feel different. The goal is to become different. And becoming different is not a 7-day event. It is a 7-day beginning that opens into a lifelong practice. Marcus Aurelius did not write his meditations as a finished philosophy. He wrote them as a daily renewal, returning again and again to the same principles, because he understood that the mind needs constant cultivation. Not because it keeps forgetting, but because life keeps providing new tests, new challenges, new situations in which the old, untrained response is always waiting in the wings, ready to step back on stage the moment the discipline of attention relaxes. Day 7 is the day of integration. And integration, in the Stoic sense, means one thing. The principles you have practiced this week stop being practices and become who you are. Begin today by reviewing the 6 days that have come before. Not as a self-assessment, not as a grade, but as a map of your own interior. Where did you feel resistance? That is where your growth lies. Where did something shift unexpectedly? That is where your nature is actually stronger than you believed. Where did you fail to do what you intended? That is not a failure. It is information. It is the brain telling you where the old pathways are deepest, where the rewiring will require the most repetition. Write a commitment, not a wish, not a goal, but a commitment for how you will carry forward the practices of each day. Not in dramatic, sweeping terms. In specific, concrete, daily terms. What is the one thing from each of the 7 days that you will do every single day for the next 30 days? Attention, story, discomfort, inner voice, mortality, routine, and today, integration. 7 practices. 7 daily reps in the gym of the mind. Here is what neuroscience tells us about what happens when you do this. The process of rewiring the brain, true, lasting neurological change, requires 3 things: repetition, emotion, and time. Repetition builds the pathway. Emotion encodes the pathway deeply, which is why change that connects to something you genuinely care about, something that moves you at the level of your values and your identity, sticks in a way that purely intellectual change never does. And time allows the old pathways to weaken through disuse, while the new ones strengthen through consistent use. 7 days is enough time to begin. It is enough time to feel the difference between a trained mind and an untrained one. It is enough time to know, not just intellectually but experientially, that change is possible. That the brain you have is not the brain you have to keep. That the patterns you have been running are not sentences. They are habits, and habits can be changed. The Stoics called the person who had genuinely internalized these practices the sage, the ideal of the fully rational, fully virtuous human being who is never enslaved by their passions, never at the mercy of circumstance, never blown off course by the winds of fortune. They acknowledged that no human being achieves the sage perfectly, but they insisted that the sage is the direction, the North Star, toward which every practice, every day, every honest examination of the self is pointed. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video 7 days ago. Something has shifted. The question is not whether it has shifted. It has. The question is what you do with that shift. Whether you let it settle back into the comfortable patterns of before, or whether you pick up the discipline every single morning and choose, again and again and again, to be the person you are becoming. That choice is yours. It has always been yours. The Stoics just gave you the tools to make it consciously. And you, today, have chosen to use them. The science behind why this works, what your brain is actually doing. Throughout this 7-day journey, I have referenced neuroscience alongside Stoic philosophy. And I want to take a moment to go deeper into exactly what is happening in your brain during this process, because understanding the mechanism is not just intellectually satisfying. It changes how seriously you take the practice. And how seriously you take the practice determines how completely it works. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of connections with other neurons. These connections, called synapses, are the physical substrate of everything you think, feel, believe, remember, and do. And crucially, they are not fixed. The brain is a living, dynamic, constantly restructuring system. Every experience you have, Every thought you think repeatedly, every behavior you practice, all of it physically changes the brain. This is the scientific meaning of neuroplasticity, and it is one of the most important discoveries in the history of neuroscience. The key principle is this: neurons that fire together wire together. When two neurons activate simultaneously, when a thought connects to a feeling, when a behavior connects to a reward, when a situation connects to a response, the synaptic connection between them strengthens. The more often this firing happens, the stronger and more automatic the connection becomes. This is how habits form. This is how beliefs become embedded. This is how personality, which most people think of as fixed and innate, is actually a dynamic structure that continues changing throughout life. The Hebbian learning principle, named after the neuroscientist Donald Hebb, who first described it in 1949, is the neurological description of what Marcus Aurelius was practicing in his private journals 1800 years earlier. Every time Marcus returned to a principle, every time he wrote, again, about the importance of discipline, or the shortness of life, or the irrelevance of public opinion, he was strengthening the synaptic pathways that connected his sense of self to those principles. He was making them automatic. He was encoding them into the structure of his brain so deeply that in the heat of political crisis, military emergency, or personal loss, the Stoic response came not as a labored choice, but as a natural reflex. There is also the role of the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, responsible for the fight or flight response, and for the encoding of emotionally significant memories. The amygdala is the reason that fear-based memories are so persistent and so vivid. It is the reason that a single traumatic experience can leave a mark that takes years to process. But it is also, and this is what most people do not know, the reason that practices carried out with genuine emotional engagement are encoded so much more powerfully than purely intellectual exercises. When the practices of this 7-day journey connect to something you genuinely care about, to your relationships, your purpose, your deepest values, the amygdala flags them as significant, and the brain encodes them at a deeper level. This is why the Stoics were not abstract theorists. They were practitioners who engaged with their philosophy emotionally, personally, and daily. Marcus Aurelius was not writing philosophical treatises. He was writing personal, emotionally engaged reflections on his own struggles, his own failures, his own fears. And in doing so, he was using the full architecture of his brain, not just the rational prefrontal cortex, but the emotionally encoding amygdala, the habit-forming basal ganglia, the attention-regulating reticular activating system, to embed wisdom at every level. The 7 days you have just completed have engaged all of these systems. The practice of attention activated and strengthened the prefrontal cortex. The rewriting of the victim story created new associative pathways that compete with the old ones. The voluntary discomfort trained the executive control networks. The examination of the inner voice brought unconscious automatic patterns into conscious awareness, the first necessary step before any pattern can be changed. The contemplation of death activated the amygdala around your deepest values, encoding them more powerfully. The building of routine engaged the basal ganglia in the formation of automatic sequences, and the integration of day 7 has consolidated everything across the entire neural architecture. You have not just thought about changing your mind. You have actually begun to change it. The science is clear on this. The philosophy is clear on this. And if you have genuinely done the work of each day, not just watched the video, but actually practiced, you can feel it. That slight, unmistakable difference in how your mind meets the morning. That fraction of a second of space between what happens and how you respond. That quiet, growing sense that you are not simply being lived by your habits, but that you are, slowly and powerfully, beginning to be the one doing the living. Beyond 7 days, the Stoic path forward. 7 days is a beginning. A real one. A powerful one. But the Stoics would not let you sit comfortably with the idea that 7 days is enough, because they understood that the mind, like the body, requires ongoing training. You do not go to the gym for 7 days and consider yourself fit for life. And you do not practice 7 days of mental discipline and consider your mind fully trained. The practice continues. The philosophy deepens. And as it deepens, something extraordinary begins to happen. The principles stop feeling like practices you do, and start feeling like expressions of who you are. This is what the Stoics called progress toward virtue, and they were very specific about what progress looks like. It does not look like perfection. It does not look like the absence of struggle or temptation or failure. It looks like a consistent direction, a consistent returning, a consistent choosing of the harder, more honest, more disciplined response. Not every time, but more times than before, and then more times than that, and then more. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Every day, acquire something that will fortify you against poverty, against death, indeed against other misfortunes as well. And after you have run over many thoughts, select one to be thoroughly digested that day." This is the prescription for beyond day 7, daily acquisition. One principle, one practice, one reflection, thoroughly digested, not merely consumed. The Stoic reading practice is one of the most powerful tools for this ongoing work. The meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the letters of Seneca, the discourses of Epictetus. These are not texts to read once and set aside. They are texts to live with, to return to in different seasons of life and find that they mean something different, something richer, something more personally resonant than they did before. Because you have changed. And as you change, the wisdom reveals new dimensions that were always there, waiting for a mind ready enough to receive them. The evening review, the 3-question practice from day 6, is perhaps the single most powerful ongoing tool in the Stoic daily practice. Do not stop it after 7 days. Make it the last thing you do before you sleep for the next year. What did I do well today? What could I have done better? What will I do differently tomorrow? 3 questions, 5 minutes, and over 12 months of faithful practice. A transformation so deep and so thorough that the person asking those questions a year from now will barely recognize the person who first sat down to answer them. The voluntary discomfort practice, one chosen hardship each day, should become a permanent feature of your life. Not because suffering is a value, but because comfort is a drug. And a mind that has learned to choose discomfort freely, deliberately, and without complaint is a mind that nothing can genuinely threaten. It is a mind that has proven to itself, through daily practice, that it is greater than its circumstances. And that proof, accumulated one cold shower, one skipped meal, one difficult conversation, one hard workout at a time, becomes the bedrock of genuine psychological resilience. Community matters too, and the Stoics knew it. They gathered, they taught, they challenged each other. They shared their struggles and their insights with people who were committed to the same direction. If this channel has given you something real this week, then this community is part of your practice. Subscribe, engage with the content, share it with someone in your life who is ready to hear it. Because wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied, and the person you send this video to today may begin their own 7 days tomorrow. The brain you have at the end of this video is not the brain you had at the beginning. That is not a metaphor. That is a neurological fact. You have thought thoughts you do not usually think. You have examined patterns you do not usually examine. You have practiced, however imperfectly, principles that the greatest minds in human history have confirmed lead to a better, stronger, freer life. The pathways are beginning to form. The old ones are beginning to weaken. The architecture is shifting. Now keep going. Because this is not the end of a 7-day challenge. This is the first week of the rest of your life. Lived with open eyes, trained attention, chosen discomfort, honest reflection, and the quiet, steady, unconquerable power of a Stoic mind. Closing. We started this video with a simple claim. 7 days is enough time to begin changing everything. And I hope that by now, having walked through every day of this journey, you understand that this is not an exaggeration. It is a precise, scientifically grounded, philosophically tested truth. The brain is plastic. The mind is trainable. The patterns you have been running are not permanent. They are habits, and habits, as the Stoics knew and neuroscience confirms, can be changed. Not easily, not without effort, not without the willingness to face discomfort, to examine your own stories honestly, to sit with the reality of your mortality, and to build the daily structure that makes change stick. But they can be changed. You can change. You are already changing. Marcus Aurelius spent decades as one of the most powerful men on earth. He commanded armies. He governed an empire. He faced plagues, wars, betrayal, and devastating personal loss. And through all of it, he returned, every day, to his journal, to the practice of examining his mind, renewing his principles, and choosing, again, to be the person he aspired to be. He was not perfect. He did not claim to be. He failed, and wrote about his failures with remarkable honesty. But he never stopped practicing. He never decided that because he had not yet achieved the ideal, the practice was not worth continuing. He kept going, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. And the result was a life of such extraordinary quality, such depth, such genuine virtue and wisdom, that people are still reading his private journal, never intended for publication, 2,000 years later. That is what the Stoic practice, faithfully followed, produces. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but a life of genuine depth, genuine strength, genuine wisdom, and the quiet, unmistakable satisfaction of a person who knows that however difficult the day has been, they have met it as fully as they were capable of. That is available to you. It is available right now, not in some future version of your life when conditions are better. Now, with the brain you have, with the circumstances you are in, with the 7 days of practice you have just completed. If this video has given you real value, if you are walking away from it with something that will genuinely change how you live, then I am asking you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Hit that bell so you never miss a video, because what we do here every week goes this deep, every time. Second, share this video with one person in your life who you believe is ready to hear it. One person. That is how wisdom spreads. Third, drop a comment below telling me which of the 7 days hit you the hardest. Which practice are you most committed to continuing? I read every single comment, and your answer will shape the content I create for you next. The Stoic path is not a shortcut. It is not a hack. It is a discipline, ancient, tested, and extraordinarily effective. And it is available to anyone willing to pick it up and carry it, one day at a time. Stay disciplined. Stay stoic. And I will see you in the next video.